Hi there. This is Mick Silva, and we've got also publisher David Morris.
Hello.
And we're two former Christian publishing professionals now trying to navigate the independent book market. We want to explore some of the bigger cultural marketplace and literary changes and questions that arise in this new publishing landscape.
Absolutely.
That's the idea.
Yeah. So we started this kind of as just like a get-together between the two of us to talk about what's going on in our lives publishing-wise, just to kind of counsel each other, because we're both freelance. Basically, we're both out in the world on our own. I've got a small indie publishing company and a literary agency, and you're a freelance editor working with authors to help them shape their manuscripts. So you should say that better than me.
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right. That's basically what I do now. Originally, I was acquiring books, and now I'm really just developing them and coaching authors in that process. Mm-hmm. But yeah, working with agents and authors and publishers brings a lot of things to talk about. And so we wanted to kind of get on here and talk about some of those recent changes that have disrupted the book publishing industry. Mm-hmm. And so Publishing Disrupted comes from that. But I mean, we still believe books matter, and they matter in a special way. So I think in some ways, it's more than ever important and incumbent on us to kind of adjust to these disruptions that are going on. Mm-hmm. And so over email, I was talking to you about like what do we want to talk about in terms of the disruptions. There's big picture stuff. There's obviously some personal issues that happen when you're talking about this. I mean, obviously our paychecks have changed. What we do
for the better
day to day,
depending on how you define what's better.
Yeah, but the day-to-day work has changed too. I mean, you can't just do publishing. You have to also do publicity and marketing and author training, and there's a lot of different elements when you go freelance. Yeah,
you're out of the big corporate environment where you're more, your special skill set that's just your skill set. Don't go into anyone else's territory either.
Right. Yeah. Less territorialism, I suppose. I step on my own toes.
Yeah, right. I yell at myself now instead of my annoying marketing people.
Yeah, but
sorry, marketing people, I love you. You know that. Just joking.
There's top level sort of issues that go on too. I mean, still there's just a lot to discuss. So I think one of the things we were hoping for this podcast is kind of get into some of that and discuss, not just the issues that we're having, but some of the disruptions that are relevant to the authors that are trying to publish books. Yeah. And it is pretty extensive too. I mean, as we come out of traditional publishing world, a lot of what we're looking at is, I mean, the assumptions have changed in many ways. Right. And so I'm trying to orient myself to that. Right. And so I think some of that could be useful. I know you're doing the same.
Yep. And I don't think people can overestimate how disrupted publishing has been in the last 20 years. That's good. I don't think they realize how much it has actually changed.
Right.
Let's just keep the example of our new life outside of corporate publishing. Sure. It's all about consolidation. Publishers have been consolidating since, for the last 25 years. I mean, they've always been doing it, but man, it really stepped up. In our business in particular that we have history with is the religious publishing business. There was a time in the late 90s, early 2000s when all the big publishers, the big five in New York, wanted to buy up the Christian imprints.
Not too long ago.
So like a lot of people don't realize that HarperCollins actually owns Zondervan, where we used to work.
Right.
And then it wasn't until 2013, in this case, where they bought the other really big evangelical publisher, Thomas Nelson, and merged them. Yes. But there was Simon & Schuster, bought Howard, which was a really tiny company, and tried to turn them into a big trade publisher. It didn't work for them, didn't work out so well.
Right.
There was, like, you used to work for...
Yeah, Waterbrook Press,
Waterbrook.
Which was Random House.
And that was a new creation by Random House.
Yeah,
There's history largely, there you would know about. Yeah.
No, yeah, right. 3 former Christian publishing execs went to Random House and said, let's start this imprint. And that was around about 10 years that I was there. And then it merged as well with Multnomah.
Right.
Multnomah Books came on during that time.
In other words, Random House bought Multnomah, and they tried to build that
merged
empire.
them,
Right.
and then of course Random House was merged with Penguin, so now it's Penguin Random.
Right.
But yeah, there's a lot of merging that's happened, and
then
of course
it's spit out a lot of employees.
Exactly.
Not just the Christian business, but there's a lot of
that's like
there's a lot of
the largest
ex-corporate
disruption you
publishing
probably,
people out there.
yeah, could point to, just in terms of like on the publishing side. But then in the midst of that, a lot of the bookstores that we were selling to were closing, and we talked a little bit about that last time.
Right.
With Amazon coming on the scene and basically disrupting everything when it comes to book selling.
Yeah, it was a distribution revolution.
Right.
That was spurred by the digital revolution.
Right.
So all books are so easily obtained without having to go to a bookstore.
Right.
And that just changed the whole complexion of things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Consumers were, publishers no longer had the exclusive access to bookstores, which had the exclusive access to book readers. Now publishers could go directly to book readers through Amazon, but they didn't necessarily have the means to drive discoverability.
That's the issue.
The authors did.
That's right.
Yeah.
And now, so what you'll hear is that authors, it's incumbent on authors to build that network and platform. And audiences have responded to that. I mean, obviously, that's why you have to have a Substack, and you have to, as an author, have a way of reaching those readers where they're already invested in what you offer. And so informing authors of that up front is largely what we have to do, you and I, publisher and editor. And then identifying, what is the niche that you're trying to reach. The audience, is pretty diverse. And there's an increase of all types of books because of this democratization effect that you point out.
Things got more segmented. We lost a certain kind of mass culture. I mean, there's still a lot of monoculture in the United States. It's still pretty crushing in many ways, but there's been quite a growth from underneath. In our context of religious publishing, what I remember noticing, and you knew about this too, is up until around 2013 or so, there were pastors of large churches or large church networks, like a Rick Warren or a Bill Hybels, and they were dominating the bestseller lists, them or people like them or people who wanted to be like them, and there was a lot of that too. Right. A lot of mega churches popping up around then.
Plenty of pastors I've worked with, yeah.
And they forming in suburbias. And they were dominating the bestseller lists, the Chuck Swindoll's of the world. Even before that, James Dobson, it was men. Right. And there was some Christian fiction that was kind of working around then. It was mostly women. But something clicked around, 2012, 2013, 2014. And you didn't see the big name.
Yeah.
Like for example, Kyle Idleman is somebody who wrote a book called I'm Not a Fan. Yeah. And, people who worked on it will talk about, well, it was because it was a great concept or because we had this great, amazing marketing technique. No, I think it was just the rising tide lifts all boats of male pastors with mega churches driving awareness of books.
Right.
But right around then, the digital marketplace really started to kick in. We had women who found each other online. They were better at it. Right. They were better at social media, better at email lists, better at blogs. That was when the mommy bloggers came. That phrase "mommy blogger" for better for worse came around.
Yeah.
And since then, with some exceptions, of course, there's always exceptions. Women have dominated in the religious publishing business. They have dominated the bestseller lists.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, and do you attribute some of that to the movement toward self-help and just general what we call Christian living as opposed to expert? I suppose there's several movements going on that change that, but fewer and fewer people, I think, we're listening to expert voices and looking for more, everyday kind of people as well. The blogging revolution started that.
Yeah.
I feel. I felt the effects of that in just going to writers' conferences and hearing from people. If they had a confident, pretty polished message, they could get a book contract, and that was the democratization effect
Yeah.
that then brought a lot of more competition to the market, and has changed the bestseller lists. I'd say for the better. I mean, that's a good disruption in my mind.
Well, let's get one thing clear. I think
Yeah.
in the Christian publishing business, that expert component has never really been that strong. It's
Yeah, that's fair.
That can be a funny.
That's fair.
That can be like a cynical thing that I'm saying, but it's more like it's devotional content.
Absolutely. I mean,
that's what's going on there. Like the pastor books were like people writing pastor books.
and it's intentionally meant to be written to a popular level. I think
Right.
that's something that you're seeing a lot still. I mean, obviously, there's not a whole lot of research, and that's what I was talking about last time with the excellence. That there's been a loss of high standards, and we could get into discussions of quality and what that means later. But I've had my hand slapped a lot from people in Christian publishing who say, "Oh, how dare you? There's great standards in Christian publishing."
Yeah.
And to some degree, I understand what they're talking about.
That's just publishing elitism.
but as an editor, I have standards, of course, and there's the writers' manuals and things that tell you what the standards for editing are. But in terms of as an editor or even as a publisher, to do the checks and balances on a book takes a fair amount of time. There's a lead time on a book release, and there's a reason for that, and it tends to be that it needs a lot of checking and work and research and development. And I suppose a part of the disruption that has happened is there's less of that going on. And when you talk about Christian publishing having come out of that, and when I would argue that the quality level in general of Christian books tends to stagnate in terms of just relative to general market, and showing what's available in the general market, and in terms of standards and quality control and things like this. A lot of people just don't even realize that there's a very big difference when you're talking about general publishing.
Christian publishing tends to be very platform driven,
right?
Too.
Personality.
It's always been, who's got the biggest church? Who's got the biggest online following?
Right.
And so the writing can take second.
Yeah, it's not as well developed.
It goes into the passenger seat. Yeah.
And from that line, then there's not as much refinement. And I think that's one of the disruptions that I'm recognizing too.
Editors are doing a great job. They have high standards, but what they're working with is, let's talk about that.
It's a little bit of a less considered, but several authors we could name like that.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I think there's just a familiarity with that voice and with the type of publishing that brings.
But I do think there's a systemic force working against quality in this new digital marketplace that we live in, this new digital society. Let me put it that way.
Right. Good.
So things are, because of everything is on devices and on computers. That's how we very much shape our relationships today.
Right.
Instead of being in buildings, and reading the same newspapers or all watching the same television shows, which now with I almost said cable, but with streaming, it's like, who knows what anybody's watching anymore? Some things get popular, but who knows?
Right.
But because so much of it is platform driven, and the platforms are the followings online, those online followings are only so big. Even if you have a lot of Instagram followers, like a couple 100,000, that's not a guarantee that your sales are going to be, they might be robust at first, but it might fall off pretty quickly too. And I've seen that a lot. I've seen books. It used to be that books, especially in our business, would go onto the bestseller list and they would hang around for a long time.
Right. Yeah.
And now it's like, oh, okay, that showed up for a week, or oh no, it was 2 or 3 weeks, or well, that one's showing up for 6 weeks, but then they're gone.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really interesting development, showing that authors are actualizing their built-in audiences, but then they don't have There's not a media mechanism that's driving them beyond their built-in audiences.
Right. And we used to call that sell-through, right? It's the staying power, right? You want that long tail as a publisher. I mean, as an author, as anyone who's publishing. I mean, obviously, it's not just the blip at the beginning that you want. And books should have more longevity, I think, in general, just because it's a more important conversation that we're having. It's not just about the entertaining element.
It's a 60,000 word manuscript, let's say, for
you're putting
example.
a lot of effort. I mean,
and it's a sustained thought. It's what's the right word? Oh, it used to be a word for it. The phrase for engaged reading. You know, it's not just sound bites that you're digging into. It's There was a word that was going around a while back now.
Well, and I just always go back to the conversations. I think if I had to put my finger on, you know, what I love about this business, it's being able to have those, as you say, sustained conversations with people that transcend, you know, a lot of what's available maybe on a blog or Substack or something. You know, it requires this staying power. It requires some longevity, and a person who's been around for a while, and has kind of been studying, you know, their topic. And I suppose in a way, you know, we feel like we have been studying this topic of publishing for a long time, and you know, now that it's changing so much, we're wondering. I mean, both how do we change to adjust to it, but how do we change with it, and not just be disrupted alongside of it. You know, respond positively rather than, I suppose, negatively, because we have a lot of, I don't know, wounds from the battle, I guess, from trying to survive. And
you mean author trauma, working with certain authors.
Well, the industry will
You'd
chew
be
you
surprised.
up.
And the industry itself, you're right.
It's designed for making money and making a profit. And I think that brings its own sort of existential crises. Spiritual writing that is designed to make a profit. Right.
Yeah, there's a definite dissonance there.
That does feel a bit disruptive in your soul. So I think there is some of that we're probably going to get into in author stories. I'm sure publishing and switching agents and, you know, abandonment issues and things like this, that I think there's a lot of expectations that authors have when they come into the industry. And I had them too. Just as an editor, what we're doing here is, it's even if you don't put the spiritual, like we're doing it for God part on it, you know, well, we're doing it for a higher purpose than money. You know, certainly we're not just profiteers here trying to make a buck and sell a product.
No, of course not. Never.
Right?
No.
Yeah. I mean, even in the general market, you would hope that some people are making some higher-minded decisions.
Yeah.
And yet that's not always true. So I think that's where we're hoping to kind of step in. And
how we fit in all that as people outside of the corporate, out of a corporate entities, whether it's large-scale publishing businesses or whether it's like even like cultural networks, like church networks in the past that have helped sell and drive awareness of books and help sell books. And how do we apply our skills? Decades in the making. There's a lot of experience there. I was talking to a publishing friend just last week, and I was like going, hey, you know, don't forget, you know stuff. I mean, you know, she was feeling a little bit at the time, a little bit like you know, like she wasn't convincing somebody that about what they need to do next, and they weren't buying it from what she was saying. And you could just see the confidence was flagging a little bit, and like, this is a person who like really knows stuff too.
Has the experience.
But I think that's the experience you have when you're outside of that corporate environment that isn't validating or isn't taking advantage of your skill set. At the same time,
you no longer.
But I think, so I think a lot of it is too that so much, getting back to how things are more segmented now, and there's less mass culture. It you know, if a book if its success is based on an author the size of someone's Instagram following or email list, that means that book is getting into a much smaller universe. Now, it may sell really well at first. That engaged audience may really buy it. And I mentioned this earlier. But that's kind of the nature of the beast now. That's kind of how it works. It used to be that a publisher would get your book into a bookstore and you had it made because that's where all the consumers were. And it was difficult. And if you got a book deal, it was great. But I don't think authors realize how much of it was simply the mechanism of distribution that was marketing their book for them. Now they have to market it themselves. And that means that the scale is different. That's affected the size, the amount, the velocity of sales, the amount of sales over time. So I think people have had to come to grips with that. All the while, the technology for self-publishing has become very available. Very, very available.
Exactly.
And so you see a lot of that going on too. And I've been confronted with that question by authors often, where they say, "Well, why don't I just do this?" and of course we laugh about that because it's like, you have no idea how much work it is.
Give it a
if
shot.
you want to do it well, too.
Well,
and how much expense is actually involved too. If you want to do it well, and it shows. It shows when they don't spend the money, when they don't make the effort, whether it's design and editing or marketing. It shows when they don't do it well and they just put a book out. You can see that not very many reviews. It's not ranking really well after only a couple months after being in the marketplace. And so I think that's one of the big challenges to the fact that too, maybe that we're not seeing like really good writers emerging like we used to. Because there isn't as much curation going on. There is maybe more noise. I always go back to Barbara Brown Taylor and her books. She's sort of she's like a writer's writer in a particular context.
That's right.
Of questioning Christianity, understanding our Christian tradition.
An expert with sort of street credibility, because she speaks to an everyday reader. But
we've not seen someone like that emerge in a while. Some might argue Rachel Held Evans was like that
to some degree. She was holding that.
I think she was more of a popular leader of a changing church movement at the time, and very much revered and liked. Said and did some courageous things with her writing. But just in terms of like a beautiful writer, who you sit down to read from, their writing grabs you from the very first page.
For the enjoyment of it.
For the enjoyment of it.
That's rare. And I think what we're
Rare
talking about
today.
with the disruption and the focus on profitability, I think there is just this, movement toward something that can sell quickly, right? And we were talking about this in Zondervan. It had to sell within the first month or two in order to have any sort of impact, because we just knew it's not going to continue. There's not going to be a return for your investment beyond those first 3 months or so. And that's for front list titles, but even for mid-listers, the assumption, the publishing assumption in the traditional marketplace was that you had a limited window, and that was becoming increasingly limited. So all the work is up front. All the effort is make sure that flash in the pan is really bright and really hot.
Right.
And there is no time for a Barbara Brown Taylor to develop a following or even
The big
awareness.
publishers don't have time for that. They're not. They're more interested in how's that thing. Something that's more explosive.
Just to compete.
Yeah.
In terms of like with the noise that you're talking about.
The irony is with a lot of those authors where their first book explodes, there's like a pattern with a lot of them. And I saw this in Christian publishing time and time again where, okay, well maybe they sold 1 million books let's do a sequel. Let's do the next book by
Sure.
them. Well,
And
that
it's
one
very
only
quick.
sold about half of that. Whoa, that's still a lot of books, though. 500,000 books.
Sure.
Then the next one, but their advance had to be at least as high or a lot higher than the
lot
one
higher.
before.
Yeah. So you're losing money.
And then the next book, it's about half of that one. There's like a half-life to those,
Sure.
to that kind of publishing. And I've seen that
Oh,
I mean,
that's everywhere.
time and
Yeah.
time again.
That's it.
One of
all
the things
the
I've
big
noticed.
houses.
What was really cool was when you had an author who started out slower
Yeah.
and built over time, and that was more rare. For
Very
sure.
rare. Right.
Yeah.
I would argue that almost doesn't exist.
Right. Shauna Nequist was one. That
Okay.
was someone
Yeah.
I noticed that about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and probably there's an example. You talked about mommy bloggers. She started with a blog. Someone read it and said, here's a book. Let's compile.
Yeah.
All this was about the time of Glennon Melton Doyle's book came out. It was
Right,
also a
that's true.
compilation
Yeah.
of essays
Yep.
that worked sort of as a memoir
Yeah.
with that everyday reader kind of appeal, and then building from there a more conceptual.
Monastery was her blog. remember?
Monastery,
Yeah.
great. Yep,
Yeah.
exactly. Which, I mean, the humor was a big part of it, right? And this is the appeal that it has. But those books over time, I mean, in Shauna's case, and I think in Glennon's, it turned into more of a conceptual kind of idea, or what we'd call the big idea book, right? And I think there might be, that's more of a model than, say, like a Barbara Brown Taylor, who's starting from somewhat research-based, academic-based,
Right.
theological-based.
Right.
Like she's in that kind of group. Rachel Held Evans, you mentioned, was sort of in the midst of making that change
Right.
from expert and research driven to everyday reader type appeal. So that's interesting. There's a disruption.
How do we encourage that slow growth, deeply spiritual writer? I was meeting with someone. I had someone submit a deconstruction memoir to me a little while back, and it was good. It was another valid deconstruction story.
Sure.
It had some unique elements to it. The challenge with memoir, though, is it's hard to convince a reader to pick up a book that is someone else's story when they don't know who that person is.
Right.
So the ways that memoir works in that case is the story has to be really extreme, really
Right.
unique.
Right.
Like, oh, I need to find out, maybe this was like a train wreck story or
Yep.
a story of overcoming something really amazing. If you can throw in a really strong social theme, like women empowerment, then you get like a Tara Westover and Educated from her extreme story and her overcoming. That's I attribute a lot of why that worked to how it connected with those things. I bet it got some great PR at one point too.
Oh, for sure.
Like a lucky PR hit somewhere, and then it just snowballed. I'm just speculating. Or the memoir can work if you're famous, or if you're connected to fame somehow.
Which celebrity books. Yeah.
I saw a memoir by a new deal by like a late night host's producer.
Sure.
And it's just that was all they needed to want to do a book deal.
Right.
The publisher. That's all they needed.
The spouse.
It's connected to
the daughter of. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
I see that a lot.
Yeah. But so this memoir came in, and I thought, I researched this person. I looked her up online. I dug around and I noticed how she liked to talk about a certain theme. And I'm gonna try to leave this anonymous too, so I'm not gonna say anything more. But there was something very thematic to like a life theme, a theme about hope that's underlying hope, let's say. And I said, can you write about that?
Right.
Take you can still write a book with your stories in it, but start with the theme first, not with your stories.
Exactly.
And a light bulb went on for her. Now this is someone who's got not a platform that publishers are going to pay advances for right now. But I can tell you, we even connected on the phone after an email exchange for a while. We talked. I can tell you, if she pulls it off from a manuscript point of view, I'm going to be like, come on, let's roll our sleeves up and figure this out.
Oh, that's great.
Because you've got, if the writing's that good and that compelling, this is something that can grow, and I'll help you figure out the platform part if you're willing to put in the work.
Sure. Yeah.
And let's see what happens. And that got me excited in
There you
publishing
go. Yeah.
on a grassroots level. That got me really excited.
Yeah.
And I hope it works out.
Yeah.
We also had the theme that she wants to talk about is something that's very important to me as well.
Exactly.
So that helped.
And then there's the conversation. How does it fit with the larger, just the theme of the culture? There's a flashpoint happening in culture, and you want to have a conversation about that.
Mm-hmm.
And an author identifies that early in the book, and then they can relate their own story to that issue. That can often be a really compelling narrative. And I think what I've done as an editor is trying to help people identify those larger themes in their books, set up the reader to understand, oh, that's what this book is really about. Mm-hmm. We're using the story to learn something,
right?
Or even self-help can work that way, where you see someone else's experience and you can relate to it and you can learn from it. It's one of the joys of reading, I think. But to identify that early in the book, to set the expectation for the reader, is how you then absolutely capture the attention and hopefully at the end pays off. And it can feel like what you mentioned, Tara Westover's book, Educated, saying this is how you overcome such extreme situations, and feel that hope at the end of the book. In many ways, that's the type of spiritual publishing, or spiritual but not religious publishing, that I've always loved to do. And now I'm trying to almost exclusively work on that kind of book.
Right. So we're talking about excellence on a very fundamental level, and that is, where do you start with the way you're presenting your content?
Right. Yeah.
Are you asking a big question and kind of dancing around it? Or are you just telling a story?
Right.
And I don't want to minimize stories and narrative. That's not what I'm trying to do.
But it has limited application for a book unless you can tie it to that larger issue. That's right. Yeah.
What else would you say is excellence in writing writing?
Yeah, developing that idea. I think often we're talking about two things. It's initially identifying your passion for the story. What is it that drives your interest for it personally as an author? And then relating that to the reader. It's a way to serve the reader, to help them overcome what it is in their lives that then matches, right, what your story was intended to do. And so like the refinement process is where you kind of identify some of those deeper themes and sub-themes that relate. I mean, for instance, like in the Educated book, I mean, there's higher education. She was not allowed to learn, so she had to go and do that herself, and that taught her many things about herself, but also about the world. And so as she's relating that story, you're getting those themes and sub-themes about higher education and the purposes therein, research and its importance for just self-development, let alone having conversations like this. Being able to identify those things as you are working through and editing and refining your book.
So that was touching on the importance and value of higher education,
right?
Especially in a time when education seems,
right.
People have lost interest, or they're outright attacking it.
Exactly. And for valid reasons sometimes too, right? So I wouldn't dismiss the reasons that people are feeling that education needs to change. And yet I would guarantee she did not start with that title. And she didn't think, I'm writing a book about higher education, right? But an editor maybe comes along later and says, hey, I see this theme. Can we augment that? Can we develop that?
Interesting.
And the story is very inspiring on its own too. You don't have to be interested in that conversation to get something out of that book. And
they went with a one-word title too.
Yeah, very popular.
Right. I don't even think that's a great keyword, to be honest.
No,
Educated.
Not necessarily. Yeah, you need a good subtitle if you're going to do that.
It's a good, bold title. I mean, one-word titles tend to have a mystery and intrigue about them.
Right.
So that helps.
Right.
But it's not. It's interesting. Yeah. In today's marketplace, when a lot of sales happen online, those keywords can really help a book.
Oh, yeah.
But it wasn't getting help that way.
You're becoming a master.
Which goes to show you too. Sometimes books work despite some flaws.
Absolutely.
Whether you agree with the word educated being a flaw or not, that doesn't matter. But I can think of books where it's like, oh, that is a terrible cover, please. and then we end up publishing it, and then people say, well, people like the book, so it must have been a great cover. No, it's still a bad cover. It would have sold better if it had a better cover.
Or title, or or even just, I mean, sometimes a blurb can really help. You know, I'd love to get into that more, maybe as we explore that further. Next
titles time. Or what makes a bestseller?
Just excellence in general, and what the elements on a book are, because there's a hierarchy in terms of selling that product at the end of the day, and what is it? You know, what works and what doesn't, and we'll all admit we really don't know at the end of the day what sells books. Yeah. Other than great word of mouth, that someone read it and recommended it. Said, you have to read this.
Let's hang out with excellence and maybe make sure we just end on excellence. I guess we're getting close to the end of our time here.
Sure.
But one of the things I've noticed is I've been in a manager executive type role a lot. Even throughout my professional life, I wound up in those roles. Grateful for that. But now I'm working much more closely with manuscripts and authors.
Right.
And I'm seeing the wide variety of writing skills. Doesn't matter, men, women, ethnic, racial background, sexuality, doesn't matter. There's all kinds with all kinds of groups. Sure. That's one of the things that's really surprised me the most, where it's like, okay, that one's a little harder this person's I'm spending more time writing that.
Right.
I'm spending more time editing this manuscript versus this person's manuscript.
Yes.
Why do you think that is? Why is there such variety in writing skill? People being able to put really good sentences and paragraphs together.
Yeah. I mean, well, if we could all do it, we would do it. I think it's a difficult thing to learn how to do, to serve a reader. And I mean, I even have two minds about this sometimes. You know, when I sit down to write, I'm writing for myself. Just, whether it's a journal or a Substack post or something I'm trying to get out. It's something that I'm feeling that I would like to say. And to make the switch, when does this happen? And to what degree should it happen? The switch over to serving a reader or the larger conversation that you're trying to have. At what point are you doing that switch over? And is there a point, or is it just endemic sometimes in trying to make a point? Your idea is coming across as relevant to the rest of the people listening.
Right.
Or it's not. I think sometimes it's just, it isn't. And we all know people who are bores.
Yeah.
They just want to share their opinions.
Right.
I don't want to read that book. That's not interesting. I want to read a book from someone who is, aware that their ideas are matching up with someone else's interests.
I would add to that I think also it takes practice writing for other people.
Yeah. Okay. There you go.
It takes like a lot, like it's that sort of 10,000 hours thing.
Maybe.
And maybe you had a lot of that in your education growing up, but only so much.
It's kind of, I think what we're getting at is maybe it's baked in to some people's assumptions. The reason I'm speaking is to communicate an idea well to someone, not just to get my opinion out there. Right. Or just to like share what's on my heart. Even if you want to put it in a spiritual, sort of language. Something's burning on my heart. God gave me this message to share. And if I just impact one person with it, great, good for you. But that needs to be a refined message. That needs to be something that isn't just your idea of what they need to hear.
Right. I have one author I've worked with that has written a lot of books. And I noticed when I first started working with this author, right off the bat, like, wow, this person's a great writer. And I just started to put two and two together, and I said, well, this person has had a lot of practice writing books.
Sure.
They've written multiple manuscripts.
Yeah.
And somehow their brain is just better attuned to putting down something with good structure, putting good sentences together,
leading to a point and then making it.
Varying their words, not using the same words over and over again.
Sure.
Leading to a point, knowing that there's a takeaway. I think that's part of what
10,000 hours. And maybe that's it. That's why it's baked in. There's an excellence that you're starting with as the author. Right. And then maybe some self-editing that went on to that. And then as an editor comes in and sees some of the, places, I usually just try to reduce it to where do we need to augment the message and where do we need to diminish some of the things that are distracting.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
so both of those things have to happen in order for a book to come together.
Apply that to, this is a classic one for our backgrounds in religious publishing, but there's a lot of pastor books, right, in the past, especially, but they're still cranking them out. And a lot of times they're based on sermons. Mm-hmm. And it's well known that just because you're a great sermon writer, a great sermon speaker, it doesn't mean you can write a book well. Yeah. And you can see that. You can see that in the writing quite often. And that's why a lot of those pastors will work with ghostwriters, partly because they don't have as much time to devote to it, but also because they're just not used to that medium.
Right.
It's a different medium. It's kind of like you wouldn't ask a book author to write the screenplay for their book. Some might, but most of the time it's like, no, you want a screenwriter.
That's a different medium.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's visual.
Yeah.
A lot of pastors will work backwards, forwards, I say too, because they're starting with the idea that they want to get across and share, and usually that's something God's put on their heart. So it's a very self oriented or initiated idea, and then let's illustrate that. Let's make that applicable to people's lives. Now that's a backwards approach to me. I'm thinking, as an editor, I'd like to know what is it that the reader wants to have a conversation with. Let's start there.
What's the problem that they need to solve?
And not illustrate the idea that you're trying to share. It's more what ideas do they have that they need help with.
Right.
And an illustration isn't necessary. Your entire life is sort of the illustration.
That's why Christian authors can sometimes be really hard to work with, because they're so used to communicating about what God laid on their heart rather than what is it that the reader needs to hear.
Exactly. And I guess I call that excellence because it's putting the reader first. It's asking an author to use their skills and their developed experience for a higher purpose. And
I would just qualify that a little bit. It's not endemic to being a preacher, but I think it's endemic to evangelicalism.
It's a way of thinking.
Where you're out to, as an evangelical, you're out to prove a point from the very beginning, rather than help solve a problem.
So really, what we're saying is it's their worldview.
Yeah,
that's the problem.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why we're not in it anymore. We're done with that worldview. Resigned.
This is good. Yeah, I think we can probably pick up from here next time. That's
okay.
Really good.
Sounds good.
Yeah, thanks for the discussion.